a long time ago. I think this must be close to 25 years ago, maybe 24, 25 years ago. Warren Buffett had auctioned off his wallet and he had done it for charity. I think it was at Boys Town or something in Omaha. And he had put a stock tip in the wallet. And that went for quite a bit of money. I don't remember how much, but it turned out the stock tip was a company called First Industrial, which used to be a REIT, an industrial REIT in Chicago. And I was friends with the CEO of First Industrial. We were both in Chicago, so we knew each other. And I told him that, hey, by the way, do you know that apparently Warren must be a shareholder because he recommended your stock? And one of the things about REITs in general is that Berkshire Hathaway doesn't buy them because the tax treatment is not friendly for corporations to own REITs. So this was a case where he was probably buying it personally, and there was no conflict with Berkshire because Berkshire couldn't buy it even if it wanted to, because it doesn't work very well. So I told him it's probably likely that Warren personally owns his shares. So he was intrigued by that. And he reached out to Warren and just said, how humbled and grateful he was that Warren would even have spent any time looking at his small business. And Warren responded to him saying that if you're ever in Omaha and don't call me, I'll be quite upset. So then my friend basically told him, what a coincidence. I'm going to be in Omaha day after tomorrow. So he went to Omaha. He and Warren had lunch, etc. But one of the things that John had told me at around that time, I used to own First Industrial stock as well, is that he had mentioned that they mostly invested in industrial real estate, kind of warehouses and factories and that type of stuff. And he said that the gestation period to build a warehouse usually is less than a year. And he said the gestation period to build an office tower is maybe 3 to 5 years, more like closer to 5 years with all the permissions and all of that. He said that in industrial real estate, we don't get big cycles of booms and busts because if there is tightness in the market and a lot of people go out and build a bunch of warehouses, that space is going to hit the market in 12 months or 18 months. And there may be, some temporary weakness, but basically it would immediately, if there was overbuilding, it would reduce the propensity to build more warehouses. And as the economy grew, that excess capacity would kind of get absorbed and things would get to a kind of baseline. And again, when things got tight, people would build again. But he said that in office towers, because of the kind of 5 year period, when office vacancies become very tight and rents go quite high, everyone and their brother starts building towers at the same time. And because of the 3 to 5 year gestation period, all these towers hit the market at around the same time. And the boom and bust cycles are much more pronounced because of this lengthened period. Because basically, for example, if in 2020 we have a tightness in office towers, the first ones are going to get delivered in 2025. So people will still be starting new office tower constructions in 21, 22, 23, and even 24 because they haven't seen the impact of all the inventory that's about to hit. And, real estate guys are eternally optimistic till they get eternally pessimistic. And of course, once that inventory hits, you've got more inventory coming for another 4 or 5 years because of all the stuff that started. So basically, you would have a 5 year boom followed by a 5 to 10 year bust, and then the cycle would repeat. So he says that the boom and bust cycles get kind of aggravated in the case of office towers. And in fact, in Austin, where I live right now, we are seeing that play out right now with tall residential towers, kind of luxury residential towers. I mean, Austin was going through so much growth, 3, 4 years ago that real estate was very tight and difficult to get a space and all that. And pretty much everyone started building. And now these big towers are being completed. Some of them are going to be completed in the next 1 or 2 years. And there's a huge glut and such. So it's not just office towers. We see that even in residential towers because of the same kind of phenomena. But this particular notion of the gestation period and boom and bust, how pronounced it is, what I found since that time when I spoke to John about this is that it comes up in many other sectors. And I noticed the same thing around, I would say like 22 years ago in the oil shipping business, the very large crude carriers. And again, this was a situation, I think, in maybe 2001 or so, when there are about these 400 of these VLCCs, very large crude carriers that are used to carry large amounts of crude around the world. And there was a big glut. I mean, basically, oil demand went down and there were too many tankers. And because there were too many tankers, rental rates collapsed. And these tankers were being rented out below, they were rented at a loss, basically, because it was better than making zero. If your cost was $15,000 or $20,000 a day, from one of these VLCCs, the rates went down as low as 7 or 8,000. And what happened at that time was that there was a lot of scrapping because these owners were so distressed. The global fleet went from like 400 to 360 or 350 with a lot of scrapping because these owners wanted to get some cash. And then the market tightened, oil demand came back, but the tankers have the exact same situation as the office towers. They take, again, 3 4 years to get delivered after you place an order with the Korean shipyards. And also the second thing that happens is that when there's a boom, so what happened is these oil tanker rates went to like 7,000 a day. They went all the way to $250,000 a day. I mean, they went to the other extreme. It was just extreme, obscene profitability for these tanker companies. And everyone and their brother at that time went to the Korean shipyards and placed orders. And of course, the Koreans are not stupid. They know that they are the toll bridge that everyone has to pass through to get their tankers. So prices for new build tankers went through the roof. Like what used to be $70 million ship might be quoted at 120 million, 130 million, 150 million, because what are you going to do? You want a ship, you pay what the guy wants to charge you. And of course, the problem is that when those ships got delivered, again, they all hit at the same time and then, the same cycle. So what I've noticed in the last 2.5 decades is this mental model, which applies to office towers, as actually applies to many different classes of investments, and actually understanding that mental model can give you a big edge. And one of the things in the coal space, especially the metallurgical coal space, which is coal that's used to make iron and steel, is that coal is now a four-lettered word. Coal companies basically had two things happen to them which were very unusual for the mining business. The first is because of the Ukraine war and the supernormal pricing for coal in 2022, all of them were debt-free. They paid off every last bit of debt, which was never the case. Coal companies, mining companies always had debt. And that's what would usually get them into trouble, is because prices would go down, there'd be a down cycle, they couldn't service the debt, they would go bankrupt, and then the cycle would repeat and so on. But we had this situation starting in 22 and 23, where a lot of the coal businesses were net cash, which they've never been net cash. And not only were they net cash, the second issue is the same boom and bust mental model applies here as well. So let's say, for example, there's a downturn in the metallurgical coal market where prices are too low. Everyone's losing money or barely making money. Well, what would happen is that the high cost mines eventually would shut down because they would try to run them for some time even at a loss because they'd be hoping for a turn. But at some point, if this persisted long enough, they would shut down. And in fact, we currently have weak pricing for metallurgical coal, and a number of Appalachian mines and mines around the world have shut down. And now when these mines shut down, restart is very complicated. So let's say, for example, metallurgical coal prices right now, PLV, the Australian index, let's say it's 190 or 200 per ton currently, which is quite low. And a lot of producers would have difficulty making ends meet at that price. Let's say, for example, the price went to 300. 250 or 300. Well, that would make it very profitable for a lot of mines, including the mines that have recently shut down. But if those same companies or individuals tried to restart those mines, they would face a lot of difficulty. So typically when you shut down a coal mine, what happens is that you lay off all the miners and you sell off all the equipment. You pull all the equipment out and you sell it off, because what are you going to do with it? I mean, you want to raise as much money as you can and salvage whatever you can. So the equipment is gone, the workers are gone, and sometimes the mining permit is gone because you've got to keep paying royalties and different taxes, etc. So the permits may be gone as well. Now, when you want to do a restart, the first issue you're going to face is there's no financing available. So any restarts would need to be kind of all equity restarts, which is unusual in mining. Even if you could arrange the money on a pure equity basis, the difficulty with raising money on a pure equity basis to start a mine where coal prices are high is there's no assurance of what the coal price is going to be 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years from now. So what type of risk capital would be willing to come in, equity or debt, when the future is unknown? The $300 price might last for 3 weeks or 3 years. We don't know. And so first is the financing, debt or equity, would be problematic. If that hurdle were crossed, when the index prices go high, there are no miners available. And it takes years and years and years to build those skills. So it's not like you can go place an ad and hire miners. So when you've gotten rid of your miners and they've taken other jobs or gone to other industries or whatever else, trying to get miners back or get higher miners in a $300 per ton environment would be very challenging. So that'd be the second barrier to entry. The third barrier to entry would be that when you try to procure the equipment, just like the Korean shipyards, the equipment is going to be 2 to 4 year backlogs, 2, 3, 4 year backlogs. And just like the Korean shipyards, you would be paying very high prices for the equipment because the equipment manufacturers are in the driver's seat. So you would face a multi-year period to get the equipment, a lot of challenges to get the labor, a lot of challenges to get the capital. And then even the permits may become difficult depending on the geographies and such, because coal is a four-lettered word. So unlike office towers, where there's some predictability and such that, your main kind of gating factor would be, is someone willing to lend to you? And if rents are high, there may be banks willing to do that. There may even be people willing to sign leases with you in the future, etc. So coal has this situation, I think, with the boom and bust that is, I think, more intense now than with a lot of the other situations. We see this boom and bust situation not just in office towers or residential towers or coal. We see it in many, many places. So, for example, if we were to look today at offshore oil drilling rigs, which went through a period of severe distress a few years ago, and again, they have the same situation, 3 to 4 for 4 years to build a rig. And these rigs cost $1 billion, $1.5 billion. And again, currently there is an oversupply. So no one's going to build a rig when there's an oversupply. But, when it gets tight, again, you've got a 3, 4, 5 year period. I think from education perspective for the MOI global community and your listeners at large, I think that I have found in my investing career a focus on this mental model to be very lucrative. And once you understand this mental model and you're able to go long in one of these areas at the right time in the cycle, what can happen on the other end can challenge your wildest imagination. So the booms can be very spectacular. So what I find with some of our coal bets is they have no debt. They've got a very good position on the cost curve. And, we kind of break even or maybe lose a little bit of money at the low end, but when we've got supernormal profits coming at the other end. So that's a good equation from my perspective.
In this video, Mohnish Pabrai discusses the mental models behind investing in cyclical businesses. He explores sectors such as REITs, oil shipping carriers, and coal mining, explaining how investors can potentially earn extraordinary returns by understanding their cycles. As Pabrai emphasizes, master is the operative word. Cyclical investing is not about buying great businesses and holding forever. It requires a deep understanding of industry dynamics, supply-demand cycles, and capital allocation trends. And during the downturns, margins contract, profits disappear, and losses often widen. However, when the cycles turn, margins expand dramatically and profits can surge. A classic example was the opportunity in metal stocks during 2020-2021, when many companies were trading at depressed valuation before experiencing powerful earnings and stock price boom. That said, cyclical investing is not for everyone. It demands continuous research, industry expertise, and the ability to track key indicators that signal where the sector stands in its cycle. And for investors willing to put in the work, mastering cyclical businesses can unlock some of the most rewarding opportunities in the market.